By Review of Social Economy to talk to you about my paper. It was entitled Economics for and by Humans and appeared in 2020. I have to first give a little context in that it's not a standard research paper. It was my presidential address as the president of Association of Social Economics as I was leaving that post. And Review of Social Economy is an official journal of that organization. So in that context, I'm allowed to pontificate a little bit, and I took the opportunity to do so. So I decided to talk a little bit about what social economics is, and then present a couple challenges. So I first used like a statement of purpose from the website. The ASE welcomes academics and practitioners who regard human behavior to be the result of complex social interactions and ethical consequences. So in the paper, I start off talking about why social economics is not the mainstream. Basically, I think it should be. And I think the way the mainstream got where it is has a lot to do with sort of cultural and psychological gender biases, among other factors, of course. But that's a big one, because the mainstream pursued a very macho idea of what science should be, and it should be about math and methodological individualism and all, this kind of stuff, and really left out anything associated with femininity, left out society, left out emotions, left out qualitative evidence. So it really only looks at a small slice of the actual phenomena of the economy and uses only a small set of standard methods. So I think that might be new to some social economists and economists, the idea that there's a reason why economics got so narrow. And then I presented two challenges. One was on this idea of ethics. I think some social economists think of sort of the ethical economy, the social economy as being cooperatives, the state, employee run, these kinds of things. And I want to suggest that we need to go further in noticing that the whole economy is social. Mainstream economics has tried to blind us to that by saying it's all about maximization and self-interest and mechanism. But really, the economy is a subset of society. The second one I talked about, so that's really, picking up on the for humans. We really need to emphasize this ethical part in order to do better service in favor of survival and flourishing. The second part, or another part I talked about, was economics is also by humans. So this is the social aspect. It's not just the economy that is by humans, but the field of economics. So one part of that is we carry with us our cultural biases, such as sexism, which influences our methodology. And I think as social economists, we haven't really realized that yet. Interestingly, the mainstream is starting to wake up to a little bit of that, but social economists could catch up. Why do these 2 points make a difference? In terms of the ethical challenge, I would say that the growing split between the poor and the very rich is partly due to economists forgetting our ethical challenge. That is because the theory of the firm, the Jensen and Meckling paper about how you need to incentivize CEOs with stock options in order to get them to act in the benefit of the firm, really was a good part the way the top 1% and even fraction of that pulled away from everybody else. People used to kind of think that if you got a good salary, maybe you should be responsible enough, to do your duty. But no, if you're completely self-interested, then you're always opportunistic and you'll only do things if you're incentivized. So at high paid, mostly men, getting even more high paid because we forgot that actions have ethical consequences. However, on the other end of that, there is increasing poverty, and I'll mention particularly among care workers, nursing aides, child care workers, and the like get paid very low. And part of that is idea that's the ethical sphere. We wouldn't want to pollute it by getting people motivated by money there. And as a result, it is widely under-resourced. So somehow we've got this idea, the economy and the ethical sphere are separate, and it's really hurting us. We need more ethics in business. We need more resources to care. Time for us to bring those two together. Another place it's hurting us is the survival of our species and a lot of other species under climate change. There's a lot of rhetoric in national and international discussions of this that say, well, nations always have to act in their own self-interest. Actually, if you look at the history, nations are sometimes generous, sometimes take a long view, sometimes take things out of, vengeance that actually hurt them. Nations act in a lot of different ways. And if we're going to be long-sighted here, acting in short-term self-interest, which is the way the mainstream has tended to emphasize recently, is not going to get us out of this. So we need to remember that economy and economics have ethical consequences. In order to create an economics that is for humans, that is for people getting what they need, for people having democratic nations that are not just taken over by the elite money holders, by having a climate we can still live in. The bi-human side, the realization that as we do economics, we're also social beings, means that we recognize that, our methodology was socially created, including things like sexist biases in the past, and that to create really reliable knowledge, it has to be a social project. We bought into this idea, us being kind of generally economists and anybody doing empirical research, which I'm going to talk about at the moment, that just by following proper econometric techniques and testing, you can get to objective knowledge. And as it blew up in particularly psychology and some of the biomedical sciences, this whole replicability crisis, p-hacking, data dredging, how you can end up with a really biased literature, even though everybody is individually supposedly following the rules, because of publication bias. Only things that show statistical significance and people are willing to believe are true end up getting published. Other things don't. Because of confirmation bias. We all, even scientific researchers, come into things with our own pre-existing suppositions. And if those aren't challenged by people who don't share those suppositions, they get passed along and they get received as truth. There's a little bit of literature now in economics on why we should do things like meta-analysis, pre-registration, more replications, these kinds of things to guard against these biases. But it's only beginning, and I haven't seen that much in social economics. We should be in the lead of seeing that our knowledge creation itself is social. And as an example of why that is important, I put in the paper a brief summary of some years of research I did on a bit of behavioral economics research. There were a whole bunch of papers coming out saying that women are more risk averse than men. And I was curious as to the empirical evidence behind that. So I did actually 2 statistical meta-analyses plus some deep dives into the language being used, and found out that basically people were finding the stereotypes they started with. The actual empirical evidence is not that there's any kind of significant, much less substantively significant, much less fundamental difference between men and women in risk-taking. What there is sometimes, and you more often get published if you're sometimes, as in this side, a statistical difference between the average woman and the average man. But this difference between means is small compared to the variation among men and among women. So if you really look at what the data says, there's this tremendous overlap between men's and women's distributions, a tiny, perhaps statistically significant in large samples, difference between means, and yet it's the difference that ends up in all the titles. And the vast similarity has been neglected. I think that's confirmation bias, publication bias, all of those biases of people that just want to believe the stereotypes going in there. So it takes people from outside, people who don't believe a common stereotype of a research group, to challenge those kinds of things. So the main point of my paper is that to do good research, we need to pay attention to the ethics of our methodology, the ethics of the impact of our work on society, on inequality, on climate, for example. and also pay attention to the social aspects and how that affects how we do our research. Thank you for this invitation.